what are some of the policy changes that you feel need to happen, or things that we could do to really support not only the training of a future workforce, but bringing jobs to Illinois so that we have jobs to go to once they're trained? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Yeah.
The list is probably too long to go into, but I mean, there are a number of things that are sort of missing in the system, I think, and there are institutions that are, sorely in need of reform, and I think a lot of us are feeling more optimistic now that we have new leadership at the city colleges, both in terms of the new chancellor and the new chair of the board, where there's a whole lot of policies and practices right in that institution that need to change, because that is the place where so many low-income Chicagoans are going to get their post-secondary education, and it's where really so much of the supply of labor is going to come from, especially along the lines of what David said. I think it's hard for all of us to say to somebody, well, you shouldn't get a 4-year degree. But we certainly ought to be saying, maybe you ought to think about this in a sequence. And maybe if you get a certificate and you get some income stability, or you get the part of the way, then you can go back and get your associate degree. You can then go on to a 4-year. I think we have to encourage people to see this not as take the 4-year shot, get the big debt, and then be in deep trouble, but how can we sequence this? And I think that's one of the things that, from a policy point of view, that career pathway is going to be a very vital sort of restructuring core idea for the city colleges. So there are lots of policies there. And I will just mention one other thing, which I think is really missing so much from the landscape. And in a program like CARA, where people are really tapping into their motivations and their aspirations, it's different. But in the general landscape, there's really no career development for low-income people. The idea, sort of came from welfare reform. Get a job, any job, and that's what you should do if you're low income. And so, goes against what we know about human nature. I mean, everybody has aspirations, and why don't we tap into that as motivation? But when we looked around, probably now about 7, 8 years ago, for career development services or programs for low-income people, or people with maybe somewhat reduced literacy, that would help them make good choices about what courses to take and so on, we just couldn't find anything. So, we ended up having to create something, but the point is, that whole notion of how do you look at a career pathway and combine work and learning in sequence over time toward a goal that you really aspire to, I think we have to tackle that on a lot more fronts than we are. So I would nominate that as a
And
then there are a million others,
of course. And you're fighting on all of them, I know. The city colleges piece, one thing that I heard recently is that there are thousands of students in the city colleges that didn't really even complete the requirements for high school. So they're basically in a remedial program that isn't even really getting them towards an associate's or a bachelor's degree. And one of the proposed, kind of policy switches is, could we do a 5th year of high school so that we're not putting people in the city colleges system and draining resources from kids who really could be matriculating to a 4-year degree. So any comments from anyone on that piece?
Well, we should talk about career and technical education and all the other things. I mean, I think we both have to improve what's happening so that fewer people come to the colleges needing remediation. And then we also really have to improve remediation so that people who have high school but don't have good basic skills move more quickly. Because that's what adults really want to do. They want to move.
Mine's really fast. If we're going to do a 5th year of high school, so one of the problems we face in Chicago is half of our kids who enter into high school aren't even finishing 4 years. So this 5th year idea suggests that we might, I don't know, it's for those who make it all 4 years, they feel like they should be able to go to college now, and we're saying 1 more year. It just seems like it would really kill motivation unless it was tied to a job. And so I'm in favor of a 5th year of college if it's career and technical education based. In which, so again, it gets to every point that Ann made and to every point that Carrie made, that as long as you have a work opportunity tied to the education, or a work context tied to the literacy and numeracy, it could make a huge difference in terms of retention and success in those kinds of programs.
Okay.
I was just thinking of a model that I'm sure many are aware of, and that's the Cristo Rey model. And where high school students are working 1 day a week at a company that provides in large part the students' tuition, and the other 4 days are going to school. I mean, talk about an innovative way to engage young people in what it means to work and the relationship between their education and getting a job. I also find it very interesting that if you look at all of us, how do we get our jobs? The vast majority got our jobs through our networks. And I think when we're reaching out to the poor and people who don't have the resources that the rest of us have, one of the things they're lacking most is a network of individuals who are employed, who have influence, and who can help them get that job. And I think we need to think of creative models, not only for the youth, but also for adults, people who may be in transition. I know there's some smaller organizations out there, but I know for from our organization, we're investing an awful lot in volunteer coordination, making sure that we're engaging as many people as we can in our mission for a variety of reasons. One of them is to give the people we serve, and we call them students, they're adults, but we call them students, we want to give them access to people who know people who have opportunities, and we've got to make sure that not only are we educating the young and people who are in transition, educating them about the importance of work and what it takes to work, but also giving them the access and the network to individuals who can help them take that next step.
David or Karen?
I mean, one quick comment, and this ties not back to the education piece, but when Eric mentioned earlier, which I think is great that CARE program on average gets people into an $11.80 job with benefits. Let's admit it though, $11.80 is going to barely get you to cover the very basic cost of living in Chicago. And I think from a policy perspective, and I know we've worked with Ricky and Liz and the folks at the Centers for Working Families, there's a need for a public benefits infrastructure that is not tied to quote unquote, as we used to talk about the welfare system, but towards work. And it's there, but it's not well organized, and there's a lot of negative values attached to it. There's a lot of hurdles put in place, and really, in reality, that worker coming through the CARE program makes $11.80. Likely, at the end of the day, when you add in, hopefully, if they take advantage of all the benefits that are out there for health insurance or for subsidy, maybe some subsidy for health insurance, if they don't get full insurance through their employer, if they get the earned income tax credit, they get child care assistance and other programs, that $11.80 job could turn into a $20 an hour job, but they don't have an easy way to get there because there's hostility almost at every step of the way. So bundling these kind of supportive services tied back to the workforce, I think is a huge area of policy opportunity. The program's already there. It's just a system that isn't working very well.
And, Carrie, I want to let you in there, but I'm going to ask Deb. I'm going to put you on the spot back there. As Carrie is adding her comments, I wondered, we've been talking from the perspective of what all of us on this side of the fence are really doing in workforce development. But I'd love to have your perspective, since you're so involved in the business community here, on how does that tie into the efforts of business? What are we doing to organize Chicago businesses to create the jobs of the future so that, and are we collaborating with groups like ours? So if you don't mind walking up while Carrie makes some final comments on policy.
I just quickly want to say something about resources, since we have talked about the fact that there are fewer and they are diminishing and we have budget crises all over. I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about flexible funding, and I don't think flexible funding means unaccountable funding. And I think that our capacity, it's really unbelievable the creativity that has happened in a workforce environment in most programs that serve the workforce, as well as in an environment of diminishing and limited resources. So I really think that some of the policy change at the federal, state, or local level that's around resources, if it's not going to be more resources, it needs to be more flexible resources so that there can be these more creative ways of helping people package things, fill gaps when there's not resources, and not have to put people through so many hoops